There is a moment, quiet and easily missed, in which the world seems to soften. A moment when the mind slows, the breath deepens, and the subtle textures of sound begin to rise from the background. In this moment, listening becomes something more than an automatic sense. It becomes a gateway, a doorway into presence, understanding, and the deeper layers of human connection. Listening is not simply what happens when sound enters the ear. Listening is what happens when attention meets experience. It is what happens when we turn toward the world with openness instead of haste, with curiosity instead of assumption, with stillness instead of noise. In a life filled with constant movement, with notifications and obligations and the hum of endless information, true listening has become rare. And because it is rare, it has become precious. This is a journey into the art of deep listening. Not only the skill, but the science, the psychology, and the meaning it carries for the human being. Listening shapes how we relate to others, how we understand ourselves, and how we interpret the world. It is one of the most powerful tools we have for healing, for connection, and for clarity. Yet many of us move through life hearing everything and listening to almost nothing. As you settle into this exploration, you may notice the subtle rhythm of your breathing. Perhaps the way your shoulders ease just slightly as you exhale. These moments of calm are not required, but they can help you feel the difference between passive hearing and intentional presence. Listening begins in the body, in the stillness that allows the mind to open. Imagine for a moment the soundscape around you, the soft ambient tones of your room, the faint hum of distant air, the way silence itself seems to have a texture. When you pay attention, the ordinary soundscape becomes extraordinary, and this awareness is the foundation of everything that follows. Throughout this journey, we will explore the hidden complexity of sound and the astonishing intelligence of the human brain. We will examine the psychology of presence, the emotional layers beneath every voice, and the ancient traditions that cultivated listening as a path to wisdom. We will look at why silence matters, why being heard heals, and why the future of human connection may depend on rediscovering what it means to truly listen. Now, this is not only a scientific exploration, it is a human one, a story about attention, empathy, and the inner quiet that allows us to understand one another. A story about how listening shapes identity, relationships, and even the structure of the nervous system. A story about how listening, at its deepest level, is an act of love. As we begin, allow yourself to arrive. Let the pace slow. Notice the weight of your body, the inhale, the exhale, the small invitation to be here, fully present, even if only for this moment. Listening starts here, in awareness, in stillness, in the simple willingness to pay attention to what is unfolding now. The art of deep listening is not something we master by force. It is something we remember, something we return to, something that opens when we do. Let us begin this journey with curiosity, with gentleness, and with the quiet recognition that listening is one of the most profound and transformative abilities we possess. The lost skill of presence. Presence is the foundation upon which all deep listening is built. It is the quiet state of being fully here, undivided, unscattered, and receptive. Yet presence has become one of the rarest qualities in modern life. We live surrounded by devices designed to fragment attention. We navigate a world that rewards constant output and continuous engagement, often at the cost of stillness. In this landscape, listening suffers because listening cannot flourish in a mind that is elsewhere. To understand presence, imagine what it feels like when someone truly listens to you. Their gaze is steady, their posture relaxed, their mind attentive and open. You can sense that they are not waiting for their turn to speak. They are not drifting into distraction. They are here, with you, in this moment. That experience alone can feel like a breath of fresh air. It can feel grounding, soothing, even healing. Yet many people rarely experience this kind of attention, either from others or from themselves. The erosion of presence begins with speed. Modern life moves quickly, and we often move with it, racing from one thought to another, one task to the next. This restless pace trains the brain to skim rather than absorb, to react rather than reflect. Listening requires a different tempo. It requires a gentle slowing, a quiet willingness to linger in the space between words. When the mind is rushing, the nuance of another person's voice is lost. The emotional texture disappears. Listening becomes shallow, like reading the surface of a page without understanding the meaning behind the sentences. A second challenge is cognitive overload. The human brain has limits, and yet we continuously fill it with more information than it can process comfortably. Notifications, messages, news, responsibilities, and mental to-do lists all compete for space. When the mind is full, presence becomes difficult. Listening becomes filtered through layers of inner noise. Even when someone is speaking directly to us, part of the mind remains preoccupied, wandering through unfinished tasks and unresolved thoughts. Deep listening, by contrast, requires spaciousness, a quiet mental room in which the voice of another can be received. There is also the influence of habit. Many people listen out of courtesy, not intention. They hear the words but remain anchored in their own perspective. They anticipate what will be said next. They prepare their own response. They project their expectations onto the conversation. This habitual mode of listening is efficient, but it prevents discovery. Presence invites a different approach, one defined by curiosity rather than assumption. It asks us to enter a moment as if it is unfolding for the first time. Presence does not mean emptiness. It means clarity. It means noticing without judgment. It means letting the mind become calm enough to perceive what is actually being said, not just what we imagine or expect. When presence is cultivated, listening deepens naturally. The tone of a voice becomes richer. The pauses become more meaningful. The emotional currents beneath the words become clearer. Even silence takes on significance. One of the most powerful aspects of presence is its effect on the nervous system. When we slow down, breathe, and truly attend, the body shifts into a more regulated state. Muscles soften, the jaw loosens, breathing becomes steadier. This physiological shift enhances listening because a calm body supports an open mind. Emotional reactivity decreases, allowing for greater understanding and empathy. In moments like this, you might notice the subtle weight of your breath or the gentle release of tension in your shoulders. These sensations signal that the mind is becoming more receptive. Presence also transforms relationships. People feel valued when they are listened to with full attention. They feel safe, understood, and respected. This sense of being seen strengthens trust, deepens connection, and reduces conflict. When presence is missing, relationships become marked by misunderstanding and miscommunication. When presence is present, even difficult conversations become more humane and compassionate. Yet presence is not limited to interpersonal connection. It also shapes how we listen to ourselves. The internal world has its own voice, its own rhythms, its own quiet messages. Without presence, these signals go unnoticed. The body speaks in subtle ways. The emotions whisper in tones that are easy to ignore. Presence allows us to hear these internal cues before they become distress or imbalance. It helps us recognize when we are tired, overwhelmed, or in need of nourishment. It brings awareness to the internal landscape that guides our decisions and shapes our well-being. Presence is a skill that can be relearned. It begins with pausing, with taking a breath that is just a little slower, with allowing a moment of stillness before reacting. These small gestures create openings in the mind. They create space in which listening can grow. Even now, a slow exhale may help the mind settle. A gentle awareness of your surroundings may reveal the quiet sounds that were previously unnoticed. The art of deep listening cannot exist without presence. Presence is the soil that nourishes it, the air that helps it breathe, the light that allows it to grow. In a world filled with noise, presence becomes an act of quiet courage. It is the choice to be here, in this moment, fully awake to what is unfolding. When presence returns, listening becomes something deeper than a skill. It becomes a way of being. The neuroscience of hearing. Hearing begins as a physical event, a movement of air shaped into pressure waves that ripple across space. But listening, the deeper act of interpreting and understanding, is a profoundly neural experience. The journey from vibration to meaning is long, intricate, and astonishingly intelligent. Every sound that reaches your awareness passes through a complex network of biological systems designed to decode rhythm, tone, emotion, and intention. To understand listening, we must understand this path, for within it lies the foundation of how the human brain makes sense of the world. Imagine a single sound, a soft hum, a distant voice, the gentle shift of air as you exhale. Each of these sounds begins outside the body. They exist as waves, patterns of pressure that travel through the air. When they reach the ear, the outer shape of the ear acts like a funnel, gathering these waves and guiding them inward. This beautifully curved structure, with its ridges and folds, is not merely decorative. It shapes how we locate sound in space, helping the brain determine direction and distance. Even before the brain becomes involved, listening has begun. Inside the ear canal, the sound meets the eardrum, a thin membrane that vibrates with remarkable sensitivity. These vibrations are tiny, yet they carry the entire complexity of the soundscape. The eardrum passes these movements to three small bones known as the ossicles. These bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, are the smallest in the human body, yet they amplify the vibrations with extraordinary precision. The stapes, the final link, presses against a structure called the cochlea, and it is within the cochlea that the mechanical world becomes electrical, the physical becomes neural, the ear becomes the brain. The cochlea is a spiral filled with fluid and lined with microscopic hair cells that bend in response to vibration. These cells are exquisite sensors. Each one is tuned to a specific frequency, much like the keys of a piano. When a particular frequency enters the ear, the corresponding hair cells respond, converting their movement into electrical signals that travel along the auditory nerve. In this moment, the brain receives the raw material of sound. But the sound itself, the meaning, the emotion, the significance, has not yet formed. That formation happens deeper within the mind. As the auditory nerve carries its signals into the brainstem, the brain begins to sort, filter, and organize the incoming information. At this early stage, the brain makes rapid assessments. Is this sound familiar? Is it safe? Does it require immediate attention? These evaluations happen in milliseconds, drawing from ancient neural circuits designed to protect us. Even at this basic level, the brain is not simply receiving sound. It is interpreting, predicting, and responding. From the brainstem, the information travels upward to structures like the thalamus, the brain's central relay station. The thalamus determines where the information must go next. It filters out irrelevant noise and heightens important signals. This filtering is essential. Without it, the world would be overwhelming. Every rustle, every hum, every distant vibration would crowd the mind. The ability to filter sound is one of the reasons humans can focus on a single voice in a noisy room. The brain is constantly deciding what deserves attention. Eventually, the sound reaches the auditory cortex, located in the temporal lobes. Here, the brain constructs the auditory world. It identifies patterns, interprets rhythm, recognizes voices, and detects emotional nuance. The auditory cortex interacts with memory, emotion, and language networks to create meaning. The sound of a friend's voice triggers memories and emotions. The subtle change in tone signals intention. A pause may feel tense, gentle, uncertain, or thoughtful. All of this emerges in the brain's quiet electrical symphony. Listening, then, is not a passive experience. It is an active collaboration between the sensory organs and the mind. The brain does not simply hear. It predicts. It fills in gaps. It anticipates what comes next. Neuroscientists refer to this as predictive coding, a process by which the brain constantly compares incoming information with internal expectations. When someone speaks, the brain is already preparing possible responses. It is analyzing tone, context, and patterns to construct understanding. This predictive process allows communication to feel smooth and instantaneous, even though the underlying neural work is complex and continuous. One of the most fascinating aspects of auditory neuroscience is how deeply sound is intertwined with emotion. The limbic system, a network responsible for emotional processing, is closely connected to the auditory cortex. This means that sound can evoke immediate emotional responses before conscious thought has time to catch up. A gentle voice may soothe. A harsh tone may raise tension. A familiar melody may evoke nostalgia. Listening is an emotional experience, not merely a cognitive one. Breathing naturally deepens as the nervous system softens. Shoulders may ease. The space around each sound may feel larger. These small physiological shifts reflect a deeper truth. The body listens alongside the mind. When you are calm, you hear more clearly. When you are tense, your range of perception narrows. The auditory system is sensitive to internal state. This is why mindfulness practices often begin with sound. A bell, a breath, a moment of silence. Sound anchors awareness. Another remarkable feature of the auditory system is its ability to adapt. The brain sharpens its sensitivity to the sounds it deems important and softens its attention to those it considers irrelevant. Over time, this can reshape how we perceive the world. Musicians develop extraordinary auditory acuity. Parents become attuned to the subtle variations in their child's voice. People living in quiet environments notice small sounds that city dwellers may ignore. Listening, like any skill, reflects the training of the brain. But there is another side to this adaptability. In a world saturated with sound, conversations, traffic, music, notifications, the auditory system can become overloaded. When the brain is forced to process too much information, it may begin to downgrade its sensitivity. Subtle emotional cues become harder to detect. The nuances of conversation fade. The ability to rest in silence diminishes. Deep listening requires an environment in which the brain can breathe, even briefly. Neuroscience also reveals that hearing is profoundly social. Humans evolved to communicate through speech, tone, and subtle auditory cues. The brain devotes significant energy to interpreting these cues. When we listen, we are not only receiving information, we are engaging in a form of social attunement. The brain mirrors the emotions of the speaker, synchronizing rhythms of speech and breath. This synchronization, sometimes called neural resonance, forms the basis of empathy. To listen deeply is to allow one nervous system to gently meet another. You may notice, even now, the subtle resonance between your breath and the flow of the words. The calm that arises when the pace slows. Listening draws the body into harmony with the moment. It invites a state of presence that is both restful and alert. The brain, in these moments, becomes more receptive, more attuned, and more capable of perception. The neuroscience of hearing reveals something profound. Listening is not simply the reception of sound. It is a vast interplay between physical vibrations, neural pathways, emotional networks, and cognitive interpretation. It is one of the brain's most intricate achievements, one that evolved to help humans connect, understand, and survive. Every sound is a message. Every pause is a signal. Every voice is an entire landscape of meaning. And the brain, with its extraordinary capacity, translates the world of sound into the world of human experience. This is the foundation of deep listening, a biological symphony that supports the emotional, relational, and philosophical journey we are exploring. The more we understand this neural foundation, the more deeply we can appreciate the power of listening as an art. Next chapter will continue building on this foundation, exploring how attention and awareness shape the listening mind. Attention and awareness. Listening begins long before a sound reaches the ear. It begins in the mind, in the quiet space where attention decides what enters awareness and what fades into the background. In many ways, attention is the true gateway to listening. It determines what we notice, how we interpret it, and what meaning we assign to the world around us. Without attention, even the clearest sound becomes invisible to the mind. With it, even the faintest whisper can become deeply significant. Attention is often described as a spotlight, a focused beam that illuminates one part of experience while leaving others in shadow. But this metaphor is incomplete. Attention is not a fixed beam. It shifts, expands, contracts, wanders, sharpens, softens, and responds to both internal and external forces. It is a living process, a dynamic movement through the landscape of perception. The modern world places extraordinary demands on attention. Our devices, conversations, responsibilities, and internal thoughts all compete for space in the mind. This constant competition creates a form of cognitive tension. The brain becomes trained for rapid switching rather than sustained depth. It becomes accustomed to shallow sampling rather than immersive presence. When the mind is accustomed to fragmentation, deep listening becomes difficult. The spotlight flickers too quickly to absorb nuance. Yet attention, at its core, is a skill, and like any skill, it can be cultivated. One of the essential principles of attention is selectivity. At any moment, the brain receives far more sensory information than it can possibly process. To cope, the mind filters. It prioritizes certain signals and discards others. Most of this filtering happens unconsciously. The brain detects what is familiar, what is new, what is emotionally charged, what is potentially threatening, and what aligns with your goals in the moment. This filtering shapes the world you experience. If someone speaks to you while your mind is preoccupied, their words may reach your ear but not your awareness. You hear without listening. You receive sound without receiving meaning. This is why attention must precede deep listening. The mind must open before perception can deepen. Awareness must become clear before understanding can take shape. Attention is not only selective, it is also influenced by intention. When you decide to listen deeply, the brain adjusts. The prefrontal cortex, involved in focus and executive control, increases its activity. The auditory cortex sharpens its sensitivity. Networks responsible for emotional attunement become more responsive. In essence, the brain reconfigures itself to prioritize listening. Intention becomes architecture. What you choose to focus on reshapes the neural pathways that interpret the world. You may notice, even now, the gentle shift that occurs when you bring awareness to the act of listening. The breath slows. The mind becomes slightly more still. The muscles around the face soften. These small shifts signal that attention is gathering itself, preparing to rest on the moment rather than drifting into thought. Listening invites the body into coherence. Another important aspect of attention is the relationship between awareness and distraction. Distraction indeed is not a failure of listening. It is a natural part of the cognitive process. The mind wanders because it is constantly scanning for new information. It is trying to protect, to anticipate, to plan. In deep listening, the goal is not to eliminate distraction. The goal is to notice it gently and return to the moment without judgment. This simple act of returning strengthens the capacity for presence. Awareness is broader than attention. If attention is the spotlight, awareness is the entire room. It is the background in which all experience unfolds. Awareness includes the sounds around you, the sensations in the body, the emotional tone within, and the subtle shifts in the environment. When listening is rooted in awareness, it becomes more spacious, less effortful. You are not forcing yourself to focus. You are simply allowing the moment to unfold. Many people confuse listening with waiting. They wait for their turn to speak. They wait for information that fits their expectations. They wait for cues that align with their assumptions. But listening grounded in awareness does not wait. It receives. It notices without rushing toward interpretation. It opens rather than anticipates. This openness allows meaning to emerge naturally. Attention also shapes emotional perception. When you listen with narrow attention, focused solely on words, you may miss the emotional landscape beneath them. When you listen with broad awareness, the subtle qualities of tone, rhythm, pacing, and silence become clearer. You sense not only what is being said, but how it is being said. This is essential for understanding others. Much of human communication is non-verbal. It is conveyed through breath, pause, and emotional resonance. To perceive this, attention must become flexible and sensitive. The quality of attention you bring to a moment shapes the experience you have. When attention is scattered, the world feels chaotic and distant. When attention is steady, the world feels more coherent. When attention is gentle, the world feels safe. This is why certain environments evoke calm. They reduce cognitive load, allowing attention to settle. Even now, a single slow breath may help the mind steady itself. As attention softens, the world becomes more vivid. Awareness also allows you to listen to the quiet signals within yourself. The subtle pull of intuition, the tightening of the chest when something feels off, the warmth that arises when you feel understood. These inner cues often speak softly, and they are easily lost in noise. When awareness expands, these signals become clearer. They guide decisions, shape relationships, and reflect deeper truths about your emotional landscape. There is also the role of attention in empathy. To truly understand another person, the mind must step out of its habitual patterns. It must make room for perspectives that differ from its own. This requires a special kind of attention, one that is receptive, unguarded, and free of the desire to control the narrative. In these moments, listening becomes a form of connection, a bridge between separate inner worlds. Attention is a finite resource. It must be cared for. When attention is overstretched, listening becomes mechanical. When attention is nourished through rest, stillness, and intentional presence, listening becomes richer. This is why pauses matter. This is why silence matters. Silence gives attention a place to rest. It gives awareness a place to settle. It gives the nervous system space to soften. There is a quiet beauty in recognizing that attention is not only cognitive, but also emotional. The mind pays attention to what it loves, fears, desires, or deeply values. This emotional layer shapes perception more than logic alone. When you care about someone, you naturally listen more deeply. When you feel safe, you listen more openly. When you feel rushed or threatened, attention contracts. Listening narrows. Emotional safety expands awareness. This is why calmness supports deep listening. A calm body creates a calm mind, and a calm mind listens with clarity. The art of listening is, in many ways, the art of managing attention, not rigidly, but gently. Not with force, but with intention. Not with pressure, but with curiosity. Attention is a living process, a shifting rhythm that can be guided through presence and awareness. As you continue listening to these words, you may notice the subtle sensation of breath moving through the body. You may notice the quietness of the space around you. These small moments of awareness are not distractions. They are the environment in which deep listening grows. Each pause, each breath, each moment of stillness helps attention settle more deeply into experience. In the absence of awareness, listening becomes shallow. In the presence of awareness, listening becomes profound. The mind becomes clear. The emotional landscape opens. The world becomes more vivid and more meaningful. Deep listening begins in this clarity. Attention is the gateway. Awareness is the ground. Through them, listening becomes not only a skill, but a way of experiencing reality with presence, depth, and sensitivity. Next chapter will continue the journey into the emotional dimension of listening, where meaning lives beneath the surface of every voice and every silence. Emotional listening. Emotional listening is the art of hearing, not only the words being spoken, but the feelings, intentions, and quiet truths that flow beneath them. It is a form of perception that reaches deeper than language, deeper than logic, and deeper than the surface level of communication. It is how human beings understand one another at the level of emotion, intuition, and empathy. Without emotional listening, conversation becomes mechanical. With it, connection becomes alive. Every voice carries a landscape of feeling. Even the simplest sentence holds subtle emotional currents. A pause may carry uncertainty or longing. A shift in tone may reveal frustration or tenderness. A slight tremble may reflect vulnerability. People rarely state their emotions directly. Instead, emotion lives in the rhythm, in the pacing, in the breath, in the silence between phrases. Emotional listening is the practice of tuning into this deeper layer. The human brain is exquisitely designed for this. It contains networks that respond to emotional cues within fractions of a second. When someone speaks, your brain begins to mirror their internal state. This is known as emotional resonance. It is not something you choose. It is built into your biology. Humans are wired to sense one another, to feel what others feel, to understand emotion through tone as much as through words. In many situations, tone carries more meaning than the content of speech. A calm voice can turn a difficult truth into something bearable. A sharp tone can turn neutral words into a source of tension. Emotional listening requires presence. When the mind is preoccupied, it notices words but misses tone. It hears sentences but misses intention. It processes information but misses emotion. Presence widens perception. It allows the nervous system to attune to the energy behind the voice. You may notice, even in this moment, the subtle emotional atmosphere created by the cadence of these sentences. Listening is not only an intellectual act, it is an emotional experience. What shapes emotional listening is openness. Many people hear emotion but resist it. They interpret it through the lens of their own fears, expectations, assumptions, or unresolved experiences. If someone speaks with frustration, the listener may become defensive. If someone speaks with sadness, the listener may feel pressure to fix it. Emotional listening does not seek to fix, judge, analyze, or defend. It seeks to understand. It receives the emotion without immediately reacting to it. This creates space. Space for the speaker, space for the listener, space for clarity. Emotion is a form of communication. It communicates needs, desires, fears, and boundaries. When someone expresses an emotion, even subtly, they are revealing something meaningful. They may not say it with words, but they say it with tone, with breath, with silence. Emotional listening involves recognizing these cues. It involves sensing the emotional truth behind the surface. Consider a conversation with someone who is overwhelmed. Their voice may sound tight, their words rushed. Beneath the content, there may be fatigue, stress, or a longing for support. Or imagine someone who speaks softly when they normally speak with confidence. The change may signal vulnerability, uncertainty, or a quiet request for gentleness. Emotional listening perceives these shifts. It pays attention to what feels different. It notices what is present but unspoken. Humans communicate emotions through vocal qualities long before they develop language. Even infants respond to tone before they understand words. They recognize warmth, safety, frustration, or tension through sound alone. This sensitivity does not disappear in adulthood. It simply becomes layered beneath culture, habit, and intellect. Deep listening returns us to this primal skill. It is important to understand that emotional listening is not the same as absorbing someone else's feelings. Emotional resonance allows you to sense another's experience, but emotional boundaries allow you to remain steady. The skill lies in perception, not absorption. When listening deeply, the breath may naturally slow. The shoulders may soften. These physiological adjustments help stabilize the nervous system so that you can listen without becoming overwhelmed. A calm listener creates a calming presence. Emotional listening also involves recognizing the emotional patterns within yourself. When you listen to others, your own emotions may respond. Perhaps a tone reminds you of something familiar. Perhaps a pause triggers a feeling of anticipation. Emotional listening includes awareness of your internal reactions so that they do not distort your understanding. When you are aware of your own emotional shifts, you can distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to the other person. A significant part of emotional listening is attunement. Attunement is the ability to sense the emotional state of another person with accuracy and sensitivity. It involves noticing subtle cues, the pace of speech, the depth of breath, the softness or sharpness of tone, the presence of hesitation, the changing tempo of words. Attunement communicates care. It tells the other person, without needing to say it directly, that their emotional world matters. This fosters trust. Emotional listening also enhances communication because it allows you to respond to the underlying need rather than the surface expression. If someone speaks sharply, the surface may show irritation, but the underlying need may be reassurance or understanding. If someone withdraws and speaks quietly, the surface may show distance, but the underlying need may be safety or space to gather their thoughts. When your response is directed at the deeper need, communication becomes smoother, kinder, and more effective. Listening in this way requires slowing down. The nervous system must shift from reactivity to receptivity. You may notice how the pace of breath influences this process. A slow breath brings calm. Calm brings clarity. And clarity allows you to hear the emotional layers beneath the words. There is beauty in emotional listening because it reveals the humanity in every voice. It shows that each person carries a private emotional world. Some carry anticipation, some carry sorrow, some carry joy that they wish to share, some carry fear that they wish to release. Emotional listening allows you to witness these feelings with compassion. In close relationships, emotional listening is especially transformative. It allows partners, friends, and family members to feel seen. When someone feels emotionally understood, tension dissolves. The nervous system relaxes. Defensiveness softens. A deeper sense of closeness emerges. Emotional safety is built not through brilliant words, but through gentle awareness of emotion. Even in professional environments, emotional listening enhances clarity. It reduces conflict, increases mutual understanding, and makes collaboration smoother. Many misunderstandings arise not from words, but from misinterpreting emotional cues. Emotional listening clarifies these cues before they escalate. Emotional listening does not require perfection. It requires presence. It requires sincerity. It requires willingness to feel with someone without losing yourself. This is the heart of empathy. Empathy is not agreement. It is not absorption. It is understanding. It is the recognition that another person's emotional world is real and meaningful. You may sense, even as you listen now, the way your mind responds to the emotional tone of these reflections. Perhaps a feeling of calmness. Perhaps a sense of expanding space. Perhaps a gentle awareness of the silent backdrop behind the words. This is emotional listening in action. Emotional listening turns sound into meaning. It turns communication into connection. It turns conversation into a shared emotional experience. It reveals the hidden layers of humanity that lie beneath every voice. The next chapter will explore the psychology of silence, the quiet force that shapes understanding, emotion, and connection. The psychology of silence. Silence is one of the most powerful elements of communication, yet it is often overlooked, feared, or misunderstood. In many conversations, people rush to fill silence as if it were an empty space, a void that demands to be filled. But silence is not empty. Silence is alive. It is rich with meaning, emotion, and psychological depth. Silence shapes how we listen, how we think, and how we connect with others. To understand deep listening, we must understand silence. Every conversation is built not only on the words spoken, but on the spaces between them. These spaces give shape to meaning. They create rhythm. They allow thoughts to settle and emotions to surface. Without silence, words collapse into noise. With silence, meaning expands. Listening deepens. Connection strengthens. Silence influences the mind in profound ways. When sound stops, attention shifts inward. The nervous system recalibrates. The mind has space to process, interpret, and integrate. This is why moments of silence often bring clarity. They allow thoughts to complete themselves. They allow emotions to surface gently. They allow understanding to unfold. Psychologically, silence serves several functions. It is a container. It holds unspoken meaning. It offers space for reflection. It creates opportunity for vulnerability. It signals presence, patience, and respect. When someone pauses before responding, it often means they are considering their words carefully. They are listening deeply. They are paying attention not only to the outer world, but to their inner responses. Yet silence can also feel uncomfortable. Many people fear silence because it reveals what lies beneath distraction. In silence, unresolved feelings become clearer. Inner restlessness becomes noticeable. The mind loses its usual noise. This can feel unfamiliar or unsettling. Silence brings us closer to ourselves. For some, this closeness is soothing. For others, it is challenging. In relationships, silence communicates as much as speech. A quiet pause can convey thoughtfulness. A longer pause may signal uncertainty. A warm silence may reflect comfort, trust, or shared understanding. A tense silence may indicate conflict or emotional distance. The meaning of silence depends on context and emotional tone. This is why emotional listening and silence are intertwined. Silence is shaped by what is felt, not only by what is said. When listening deeply, silence becomes a partner rather than an enemy. It becomes the soft ground in which listening grows. You may notice, even now, that the quiet moments between sentences allow the mind to absorb the meaning more fully. They give space for the breath to slow. They allow awareness to settle. These pauses are not interruptions. They are part of the message. In communication science, silence is recognized as a critical component of active listening. Skilled listeners do not rush to fill gaps. They allow the speaker time to think. They allow the conversation to unfold naturally, without pressure. This patience communicates safety. It tells the speaker that their thoughts are not being hurried. Their emotions are not being dismissed. Their presence is welcome. One of the most important functions of silence is emotional processing. When someone speaks about something significant, fear, joy, grief, hope, a moment of silence allows the emotion to resonate. It allows the listener to feel alongside the speaker. It allows both people to settle into the truth of the moment. Without silence, emotion becomes flattened. With silence, emotion expands and becomes more fully understood. Consider how silence shapes storytelling. A pause before an important moment builds anticipation. A pause after a meaningful statement allows it to sink in. A slow, gentle rhythm creates calm. Silence influences emotional tone as powerfully as music. It is the space that gives sound its shape. In many contemplative traditions, silence is revered. It is seen as the source of wisdom, insight, and clarity. Monastic traditions use silence to cultivate awareness. Indigenous traditions use silence to deepen connection with the natural world. Philosophical traditions use silence as a lens through which to understand the self. These traditions recognize that silence is not merely the absence of noise, it is the presence of awareness. Modern life rarely allows space for silence. Noise surrounds us, both external and internal. Notifications, conversations, tasks, and mental chatter fill the day. Many people move through life without ever experiencing true quiet. This constant noise numbs sensitivity. It dulls perception. Without silence, it becomes difficult to hear subtle emotional cues, both in others and within oneself. Silence restores sensitivity. When the world becomes quiet, even for a moment, the mind becomes clearer. Subtle sounds re-emerge. Breath, ambient tones, gentle shifts around the room. These quiet sensations anchor awareness. They bring the nervous system into a state of calm. Breathing may deepen. Shoulders may soften. The mind becomes less reactive and more receptive. In group settings, silence has unique power. A shared silence can create a profound sense of unity. When people sit together in calm, without speaking, the nervous systems begin to synchronize. Heart rates slow. Breath rhythms align. This resonance creates connection without words. It is one of the most intimate forms of human presence. Silence is also essential in conflict resolution. When emotions run high, silence allows space for de-escalation. It gives individuals time to breathe, think, and regain clarity. It reduces the likelihood of impulsive reactions. A moment of silence can prevent misunderstanding. It can transform an argument into a conversation. It can shift the emotional tone from tension to calm. However, silence must be used with sensitivity. In some situations, silence can be misinterpreted as withdrawal, avoidance, or disapproval. The emotional context determines how silence is received. This is why attunement matters. Emotional listening helps you sense whether silence is comforting or unsettling, supportive or ambiguous. Silence also serves as a mirror. It reflects the emotional state of the speaker. When someone feels comfortable, silence feels expansive. When someone feels anxious, silence feels tight. Listening to silence means listening to what arises within it. Silence is rarely neutral. It has texture. It has weight. It has emotion. One of the most beautiful aspects of silence is the way it amplifies presence. When two people share silence with openness and attention, the mind becomes attuned to subtle shifts, to breaths, to gentle movements. This creates a sense of closeness that cannot be achieved through words alone. Silence invites authenticity. It invites truth. It invites connection. Silence also deepens self-awareness. In moments of quiet, the internal landscape becomes more visible. The mind reveals its patterns. The body reveals its tension. The emotions reveal their shape. Listening to oneself becomes easier. Insights emerge. Clarity grows. Silence allows the inner world to speak. In deep listening, silence is not a pause between moments of meaning. It is meaning. It is the space through which emotion travels, through which understanding deepens, through which the mind becomes still enough to truly hear. As you listen to these reflections, you may notice the subtle quiet around you. perhaps the faint hum of the environment, perhaps the gentle rhythm of your breath. These moments of noticing are the essence of listening. They are the foundation upon which deeper understanding builds. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the presence of depth. It is the doorway through which listening expands into something profound, something intimate, something fully alive. In the next chapter, this depth will be explored within the context of relationships, where listening becomes not only a skill, but a gift that shapes connection, trust, and emotional safety. Deep listening in relationships. Relationships are built on many things: shared experiences, mutual trust, emotional history, but perhaps nothing shapes them more profoundly than the quality of listening that takes place within them. Deep listening is the quiet, steady force that strengthens bonds, resolves conflicts, builds intimacy, and creates emotional safety. When listening is present, relationships flourish. When listening erodes, misunderstandings grow, distance forms, and connection weakens. To understand relationships, we must understand how listening shapes the emotional space between people. Every relationship carries its own rhythm of communication. Some relationships flow with ease, with both people feeling heard, valued, and understood. Others feel tense, rushed, or fragmented. Often the difference lies not in what people say, but in how they listen. Words are only one small part of connection. The atmosphere created by listening, warm, open, receptive, and calm, makes words meaningful. Deep listening in relationships begins with presence. Presence communicates something more powerful than any statement. I am here with you, and I am not somewhere else in my mind. When someone feels the full presence of another person, their nervous system relaxes. They feel safe to share honestly. They feel safe to reveal vulnerability. They feel safe to express emotion without fear of being dismissed or misunderstood. Presence is a gateway to emotional openness. You may have experienced moments when someone listened to you with divided attention. They nodded while thinking of something else. They responded mechanically. They seemed distracted or preoccupied. In these moments, even if they intended to be supportive, the lack of presence created an emotional distance. You felt alone, unheard, or disconnected. Divided attention weakens trust. Deep listening strengthens it. One of the most powerful aspects of deep listening is how it shapes emotional safety. Emotional safety is the feeling that you can express your thoughts and emotions without being judged, ridiculed, or punished. It is the feeling that you can be imperfect, uncertain, or vulnerable and still be accepted. Relationships thrive when emotional safety is present. Without it, communication becomes guarded. People hide parts of themselves. They speak less openly. Conversations become strategic rather than honest. Listening creates emotional safety, not through words, but through presence, tone, pacing, and silence. When someone listens with warmth and patience, the other person's nervous system detects safety. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, the voice softens, the mind opens. Even a simple pause, free of pressure or expectation, can communicate acceptance. Empathy is deeply tied to listening. Empathy is not agreement. It is not fixing someone's feelings. It is the ability to step into another person's emotional world long enough to understand what it feels like for them. Empathy requires listening beyond words, listening to tone, silence, context, and emotional cues. When you listen empathetically, you communicate. without needing to say it explicitly, that the other person's experience is valid and important. One of the most transformative elements of deep listening in relationships is attunement. Attunement is the moment-to-moment responsiveness to another person's emotional state. It is the ability to sense when they need space, when they need closeness, when they need silence, and when they need reassurance. Attunement does not come from guessing. It comes from listening. Listening to subtle cues, breath patterns, tone shifts, and emotional rhythm. Attunement creates a sense of being known. This feeling is central to love, friendship, and connection. To feel known is to feel seen not only for what you say, but for what you mean. It is to feel recognized at an emotional level. Deep listening gives rise to this recognition. In close relationships, communication often goes wrong not because people do not care, but because they struggle to listen beneath their own reactions. When someone expresses frustration, the listener may become defensive. When someone expresses sadness, the listener may feel responsible. When someone expresses fear, the listener may respond with reassurance before fully understanding. These instincts are human, but they interfere with genuine listening. Deep listening requires pausing long enough to set aside one's own emotional reactions and make space for the other person's experience. This does not mean suppressing your own emotions. It means recognizing them, holding them gently, and keeping them separate from the act of listening. When you listen with openness, your emotional reactions become part of your awareness rather than part of the conversation. This creates room for deeper understanding. Communication also becomes clearer when listening slows the pace. Many people speak quickly, not because they have clarity, but because they feel pressure to be understood. When the listener remains calm and attentive, the pace of communication naturally steadies. The speaker feels less rushed. Their thoughts become more coherent. Silence between words becomes easier. The relationship enters a more grounded rhythm. Listening also reveals the stories beneath the stories. Every person carries beliefs, memories, fears, and unmet needs that shape how they interpret the world. These underlying layers influence how they speak, how they react, and how they express emotion. Deep listening allows you to sense these layers. For example, someone might express irritation about a small issue, but beneath the irritation may be exhaustion, loneliness, overwhelm, or a deeper emotional need. Listening with curiosity allows these hidden layers to emerge gently. Curiosity is essential in relationships. When you listen with curiosity, you create the possibility of discovering something new about the other person. You open the door to surprise, to learning, to deeper connection. Curiosity dissolves assumptions. It prevents the mind from leaping to conclusions. It keeps the relationship alive. Another important aspect of listening in relationships is recognizing the emotional meaning of silence. When someone falls quiet, it may signal thoughtfulness, discomfort, sadness, or introspection. Listening to silence means listening to what the silence contains. It means being patient enough to allow the silence to speak. Listening also helps navigate conflict. In conflict, people often stop listening. They defend, argue, interrupt, and react. They listen to respond rather than to understand. This turns disagreement into disconnection. Deep listening during conflict allows emotional tension to soften. It turns arguments into dialogues. It allows solutions to emerge rather than be forced. The act of truly hearing the other person is often more important than the solution itself. Relationships do not require perfect listening. They require sincere, gradual, and consistent listening. They require willingness to pause, breathe, and return to presence even when emotions run high. Listening is an ongoing commitment, not a one-time effort. When listening is consistent, relationships become stronger, misunderstandings lessen, emotional closeness increases, trust deepens. Even difficult conversations become opportunities for connection. Listening becomes a form of care, a form of affection, a form of respect. You may notice, as you reflect on your own relationships, the moments when someone listened to you with deep presence. Perhaps you remember how soothing it felt, how grounding, how human. These moments stay with us because they satisfy a fundamental emotional need, the need to be understood. In every relationship, the quality of listening shapes the quality of connection. Deep listening is not only a technique, it is an act of love. It is a way of saying, without words, that the other person matters, that their experience matters, that their inner world is worthy of attention. Connection grows in the spaces created by listening, in the pauses, the silence, the softening of breath, the patience of presence. Relationship becomes a shared space of emotional truth, supported by the quiet strength of deep listening. In the next chapter, we turn inward to explore the equally profound art of listening to oneself, where attention becomes introspection and awareness becomes inner understanding. Listening to the self. Listening to others is only half of the art. The other half, the quieter, often more difficult half, is learning to listen to oneself. Deep inner listening is the foundation of emotional clarity, intuition, and self-awareness. Without it, communication with others becomes clouded by confusion. With it, perception sharpens, emotional intelligence strengthens, and the entire inner world becomes more coherent. Most people move through life with an ongoing inner conversation. Thoughts rise and fall, emotions shift, sensations move through the body, and subtle impulses guide behavior. But many do not listen to these inner signals with care. They override them. They distract themselves from them. They silence them. They prioritize external demands over internal truth. Deep listening begins with turning inward, gently, patiently, and without judgment. The inner world communicates through sensations, emotions, intuition, and quiet thoughts. These signals are not always loud. They are often subtle, like a faint tightening in the chest when something feels wrong, or a soft warmth when something feels right. They may appear as a sudden clarity in the mind, or as a lingering discomfort that cannot be easily explained. Listening to oneself means tuning into these signals with the same attention and curiosity you would offer someone you deeply care about. Inner listening begins with the body. The body speaks in sensations: tension, ease, pressure, warmth, lightness, heaviness. When something is aligned with your deeper needs or values, the body often feels open, relaxed, or grounded. When something is misaligned, the body may feel tight, unsettled, or constricted. Many people ignore these sensations, but they are powerful guides. They reveal emotional truth long before the mind has found the words for it. Consider how the body reacts when you hear something comforting or safe. The breath deepens, the muscles loosen, the heart rate slows. When you hear something unsettling or threatening, the body reacts instantly, tightening, speeding, contracting. These responses occur before conscious awareness. They are part of interoception, the brain's ability to sense the internal state of the body. Interoception is a key component of emotional intelligence. The more attuned you are to your body's signals, the more clearly you can understand your emotional landscape. Inner listening also involves noticing the tone of your thoughts. Thoughts carry emotion, even when they appear as silent words. A harsh inner voice may reveal self-criticism or fear. A gentle inner voice may signal clarity or acceptance. An anxious voice may reflect uncertainty or overwhelm. These tones shape your relationship with yourself. Listening to them allows you to recognize patterns that influence behavior, mood, and decision-making. Self-talk often goes unnoticed, yet it influences everything, from confidence to communication to emotional resilience. When you listen to your inner voice with compassion, you create space for change. You begin to understand where your fears originate, where your doubts come from, and where your true desires hide. You become more aware of the stories you tell yourself and whether those stories reflect truth or habit. One of the most misunderstood aspects of inner listening is intuition. Intuition is not magic. It is the brain drawing upon layers of unconscious information, memory, emotion, pattern recognition, somatic cues, to produce a sense of knowing without conscious reasoning. Intuition often speaks softly, through subtle shifts in feeling or quiet impulses. When the mind is noisy, intuition is drowned out. When the mind becomes still, intuition emerges with clarity. Listening to intuition requires trust. Many people doubt their intuition because it lacks explicit logic. But intuition is often the mind's most honest response. It is shaped by lived experience, emotional insight, and the body's deep attunement to truth. When you listen to intuition without rushing to dismiss it, you strengthen your relationship with your deeper self. Inner listening also involves acknowledging emotions as they arise. Emotions are not interruptions. They are messages. They communicate needs, boundaries, desires, and truths that may be difficult to articulate. When you notice an emotion without suppressing or judging it, you give yourself a chance to understand what lies underneath. Anger may hide hurt. Anxiety may hide uncertainty. Sadness may hide longing. The surface emotion is a doorway. Listening takes you through it. Stillness plays a vital role in self-listening. When the body becomes still, the mind becomes more audible. Silence reveals what is usually hidden beneath the noise of daily life. In calm moments, soft breath, relaxed shoulders, spacious awareness, the inner world comes forward. Thoughts become clearer. Emotions become more recognizable. Sensations become more vivid. These moments are invitations to listen. Inner listening does not require isolation or long meditative practices. It can happen in simple moments. A slow breath before responding. A pause to notice how a situation makes you feel. A few seconds of stillness before making a decision. These small gestures create openings. They shift the nervous system from reactivity into awareness. In these openings, the truth within becomes easier to hear. Listening to yourself also involves recognizing your limits. The body often signals fatigue before the mind acknowledges it. Stress appears as tightness. Overwhelm appears as restlessness. Emotional exhaustion appears as numbness. When you listen to these signals early, you protect yourself from burnout. You honor your own boundaries. You create space for restoration. Inner listening also reveals desires and longings that may have been neglected. Many people bury their desires beneath responsibility, fear, or habit. Listening inward can bring these desires back into awareness, creative impulses, emotional needs, dreams for the future. When these desires are acknowledged, life becomes more aligned, choices become more authentic, relationships become clearer. Sometimes inner listening brings discomfort. You may discover feelings you've avoided or truths you've ignored. This discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of honesty. Deep listening requires courage. It requires willingness to face what arises without turning away. The reward is clarity, coherence, and emotional depth. When you listen to yourself deeply, communication with others transforms. You become more patient because you understand your own emotional waves. You become more empathetic because you recognize the universality of vulnerability. You become more authentic because you are no longer disconnected from your inner world. You become less reactive because you understand the roots of your triggers. You become more grounded because you are anchored in self-awareness. Inner listening also creates emotional resilience. When you understand your emotions, you are less likely to be overwhelmed by them. You can respond rather than react. You can choose rather than be driven by impulse. You can navigate moments of stress with greater clarity. Emotional resilience is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to stay connected to yourself in the presence of emotion. Deep listening to the self allows the inner world to become coherent. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, and intuition begin to align. The mind feels less chaotic. The emotions feel less confusing. The body feels more rooted. This coherence creates a sense of inner peace. Quiet, steady, grounded. You may notice, even now, the subtle shifts within yourself as you listen. A softening in the breath, a gentle settling in the body. These shifts reflect the mind turning inward, becoming more aware of itself. Inner listening begins in these small moments of presence. To listen to yourself deeply is to honor your own humanity. It is to recognize that your inner world deserves attention, compassion, and understanding. It is the foundation upon which emotional health, strong relationships, and meaningful communication are built. In the next chapter, we step beyond the individual to explore cultural traditions of listening, ancient practices that honored silence, presence, and wisdom long before the modern world rediscovered their value. Cultural traditions of listening. Across human history, long before neuroscience could map neural pathways, and long before psychology could articulate theories of attention, cultures around the world understood that listening was not merely a sensory event, but a sacred act. Listening was a form of wisdom, a form of respect, a form of presence. Across continents and centuries, traditions evolved to honor listening as a path to understanding the world, others, and oneself. These traditions reveal that deep listening is not a modern discovery. It is an ancient inheritance that the modern world is only beginning to remember. Human communities have always relied on listening to survive. Before written language, stories were carried by memory, transmitted through voice, shaped by tone, held in silence. People listened not only to words, but to the patterns of nature, the rustle of wind in trees, the rhythms of water, the calls of animals, the shifting silence that signaled danger or calm. Listening was a way of staying alive, but it was also a way of learning, connecting, and belonging. Many indigenous cultures retain this ancestral understanding of listening. For example, in numerous Native American traditions, silence is a sign of respect and attentiveness. When someone speaks, others listen without interrupting. They allow the speaker's words to unfold fully, without rushing, without pushing the pace. Silence is not seen as awkward. It is seen as a gesture of honor. By remaining quiet, listeners show that the speaker's voice carries weight. They show that the moment deserves presence. In these traditions, listening is relational. It is not simply about gathering information. It is about tuning into the emotional and spiritual resonance of the person speaking. Elders often speak slowly, allowing long pauses between thoughts. These pauses are not gaps, they are invitations. They allow listeners to absorb meaning with the heart as much as with the mind. They allow emotion and wisdom to settle gently into awareness. The culture teaches that truth does not need to be rushed. It needs to be received. In many African cultures, listening is woven into the fabric of community life. The concept of Ubuntu, often translated as "I am because we are," reflects a worldview built on interconnectedness. In this worldview, one listens not only for oneself, but for the community. Listening becomes an act of belonging. When someone speaks, their voice carries the hopes, fears, and experiences of the group. Deep listening becomes a way of acknowledging that each person is part of a larger whole. Through listening, individuals reaffirm their place in the community and their responsibility to one another. In numerous Asian traditions, listening is deeply intertwined with mindfulness and presence. Zen Buddhism, for example, places profound value on silence. Silence is seen not as emptiness, but as awareness. Zen practitioners listen to the sound of their breath, to the subtle movements of their body, to the faint sounds of nature. They listen to the moment without grasping at meaning. This attentive presence cultivates clarity and calm. In Zen teachings, true listening is an expression of enlightenment, a state in which the mind becomes quiet enough to perceive reality directly. One Zen story tells of a master pouring tea for a student. The master continues pouring even after the cup overflows. The student protests, saying the cup is full. The master replies that the cup is like the student's mind, so full that nothing new can enter. Listening requires an emptying, a releasing of assumptions and judgments. Only then can new understanding arise. This teaching echoes the essence of deep listening. It begins with openness. In classical Taoist philosophy, listening plays a central role in the practice of wu-wei, effortless action. Taoist sages listened to the rhythms of nature, believing that wisdom arises from attuning oneself to the natural flow of life. Listening to wind, water, and the movement of seasons was seen as a way of aligning the self with the Tao, the underlying order of the universe. Through this attunement, actions become more harmonious, thoughts become clearer, and life becomes less forced. Listening in this philosophy is a means of living in balance. Sufi traditions within Islam also offer profound teachings on listening. In Sufism, the heart is considered a listening organ, one that perceives divine truth not through words, but through inner resonance. Sufi poetry speaks of listening to the silence between breaths, to the longing within the self, to the gentle whisper of the soul. Music and rhythmic chanting, known as dika, are used not only to express devotion, but to cultivate deep listening. Practitioners listen to the repetitive rhythms until the mind quiets and the heart opens. In this state, listening becomes a form of connection with the divine. In India, the ancient practice of Nada Yoga teaches that the universe is made of sound. Not sound in the physical sense, but a deeper cosmic vibration known as nada. According to this tradition, by listening inwardly, to the breath, to the heartbeat, to the silent hum within consciousness, one can experience unity with the world. Nada Yoga emphasizes that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of subtle vibrations. By tuning into these vibrations, practitioners cultivate inner stillness and spiritual awareness. Across these diverse traditions, a common theme emerges. Listening is not passive. It is an act of presence, an act of attunement, an act of humility. Listening requires the mind to slow down, the ego to step aside, and the heart to open. It invites a quality of attention that is both gentle and profound. It invites a softening of the inner noise that often dominates awareness. Another shared theme is the importance of listening to nature. For millennia, humans learned from the natural world by listening. The crackling of branches signaled movement. The quiet stillness before a storm signaled change. The rhythms of water guided travel. The songs of birds revealed safety or danger. In many cultures, nature was seen as a teacher. Listening to nature taught patience, intuition, and awareness. Today, many people have become disconnected from these natural rhythms. Yet, when one spends time in nature, even briefly, the nervous system often responds with calm. The breath deepens. The body relaxes. The mind becomes more spacious. This is not accidental. Natural soundscapes, wind, water, leaves, distant birds, activate neural pathways associated with relaxation and attention. Nature invites the mind into a state that supports deep listening. Listening also has spiritual dimensions in many traditions. It is seen as a path to wisdom, compassion, and connection with something greater than oneself. In Christian monastic traditions, contemplative listening, known as lectio divina, involves listening to sacred texts with the heart rather than the intellect alone. The goal is not to analyze, but to be transformed by presence. In Hindu traditions, listening to scripture, shruti, or that which is heard, is considered a sacred transmission. In Jewish traditions, the Shema begins with the word listen, emphasizing that listening is central to spiritual life. In all these cultures, listening is linked to humility. To listen deeply is to acknowledge that the world is larger than oneself. It is to recognize that wisdom can come from unexpected places, from silence, from nature, from the voices of others, from the quiet guidance within. Listening dissolves the illusion of separateness. These traditions also highlight that listening is not only for receiving information, it is for receiving being. When you listen to someone with full attention, you are not merely receiving their words. You are receiving their presence, their story, their humanity. When you listen to nature, you receive its rhythms. When you listen to yourself, you receive your own truth. Listening becomes a form of relationship with others, with the world, with the self. Modern life often loses this depth. The world moves quickly. Conversations become short, rushed, or transactional. Silence becomes rare. Patience fades. But beneath the noise, the ancient wisdom remains waiting quietly, offering a reminder that listening can be something slow, sacred, and transformative. You may sense, even now, the stillness that arises when reflecting on these traditions. Perhaps a deepening of breath, perhaps a softening of the mind. These sensations reflect the universal human capacity for deep listening, a capacity that transcends culture, time, and language. Deep listening is an ancient practice, a human practice, a timeless practice. In the next chapter, we explore the forces that block this ancient skill, the psychological barriers, biases, habits, and mental noise that make listening difficult in the modern world, and how awareness can help dissolve them. Barriers to listening. Deep listening is natural to the human mind, yet it is remarkably easy to lose. Modern life, personal history, emotional defenses, and cognitive habits all create obstacles that interfere with our ability to be fully present with others and with ourselves. These barriers are not signs of failure. They are part of being human. But to cultivate deep listening, we must understand what disrupts it. We must see the forces, both external and internal, that pull attention away, distort perception, or close the heart. When these barriers become visible, they begin to loosen. Awareness dissolves obstruction. One of the most common barriers to listening is mental noise. Mental noise is the constant stream of thoughts, memories, judgments, and predictions that fills the mind. When someone speaks, this inner commentary often runs in parallel. While the ear receives their words, the mind reacts, planning a response, forming an argument, comparing stories, recalling past experiences, or anticipating future outcomes. This inner noise reduces the space available for genuine listening. The speaker's voice competes with the listener's internal world. Mental noise is not chosen. It arises automatically. The brain is constantly interpreting, filtering, and predicting. But deep listening invites the mind to soften, to pause, to create a quiet space for the other person's experience. This does not mean eliminating thought. It means becoming aware of thought, noticing when the mind wanders, and gently returning to presence. Even one slow breath can quiet the mental noise enough to shift listening from reactive to receptive. Another powerful barrier is assumption. Assumptions are shortcuts the mind uses to interpret the world. They save time. They create predictability, but they also obscure truth. When we assume we know what someone will say, we stop listening fully. When we assume we understand their intention, we filter their words through preconceived beliefs. When we assume we know their emotions, we may misinterpret their tone or overlook their vulnerability. Assumptions close the mind. Curiosity opens it. Emotional triggers are also major barriers to listening. When someone says something that touches a sensitive part of your history, an old wound, a fear, a doubt, the nervous system reacts quickly. The heart rate increases, muscles tighten, the mind shifts into defense or retreat. In this state, listening becomes difficult. The emotional trigger pulls attention inward, away from the speaker. The conversation becomes colored by past experiences. Rather than hearing the present moment, the mind hears echoes of the past. This does not make anyone weak. It makes them human. Emotional triggers are invitations to become aware. When you notice your body tightening or your thoughts speeding up, this awareness softens the trigger. A slow breath helps the nervous system shift from reaction into regulation. And in this regulated state, it becomes possible to listen again. Not through the lens of past pain, but through the clarity of the present moment. Ego is another subtle, often invisible barrier. Ego does not mean arrogance. It means the part of the mind that seeks to protect identity, maintain control, or defend self-image. Ego interprets conversations as evaluations. Am I right? Am I respected? Am I threatened? Am I being understood enough? When ego takes center stage, listening becomes a negotiation rather than a connection. The listener becomes more concerned with being heard than with hearing, more concerned with winning than with understanding. Deep listening asks the ego to step aside for a moment, not to disappear, but to soften. When the desire to defend or control fades, the mind opens. Listening becomes less about the self and more about understanding another human being. This shift transforms communication. It dissolves unnecessary conflict. It allows honesty to emerge gently. Another barrier is impatience. Modern life conditions us to move quickly, to seek efficiency, to expect rapid responses. Conversations become paced like transactions, short, direct, goal-oriented. When someone speaks slowly or thoughtfully, impatience may arise. The mind urges the conversation forward. It interrupts. It finishes sentences. It assumes meaning. But deep listening operates on a different timeline. It requires slowing down enough to allow the speaker's inner world to unfold. Moments of silence are not delays. They are part of the communication. Patience allows depth. Busyness also erodes listening. When the mind is full of tasks, deadlines, and responsibilities, it becomes difficult to offer presence. Even when one intends to listen, the mind may drift toward unfinished work or future obligations. The nervous system stays in a state of mild stress, reducing the capacity for attunement. True listening requires at least a moment of internal spaciousness. Without this spaciousness, the mind remains divided. Technology adds another layer of distraction. Notifications, scrolling, constant updates, each one fragments attention. The nervous system becomes accustomed to quick shifts, brief interactions, and superficial engagement. Deep listening, which requires sustained attention and emotional attunement, can feel unfamiliar. Technology is not inherently harmful, but without boundaries, it shapes the mind toward fragmentation rather than presence. Another significant barrier is emotional discomfort. When someone expresses pain, anger, sadness, or fear, the listener may feel discomfort. This discomfort can create an urge to fix, dismiss, minimize, or change the emotion rather than receive it. Many people listen not to understand, but to alleviate their own discomfort. Deep listening, however, involves leaning gently into discomfort, allowing space for emotion without trying to control it. This does not mean taking on the emotion. It means being willing to be present with it. Cultural conditioning also plays a role. In some cultures, speaking is valued more than listening. People are encouraged to express opinions quickly, assertively, and confidently. In such environments, listening may be seen as passive or secondary. Yet, across history, the wisest individuals were often those who listened more than they spoke. Listening requires humility, and humility can be countercultural. Another barrier is fear. Fear of what we might hear, fear of conflict, fear of truth. Sometimes people avoid listening deeply because they sense that deeper listening will reveal emotions or truths that they are not ready to face. They fear that understanding someone's pain will require them to change. They fear that hearing someone's needs will challenge their habits. Fear creates distance. But listening, approached gently, can dissolve fear by revealing that understanding is safer than avoidance. Misalignment of emotional states is also a barrier. When one person is calm and the other is agitated, listening becomes strained. The nervous systems are out of sync. When one person is tired and the other is energized, attention becomes uneven. Emotional synchronization, often achieved through breath, silence, or presence, helps align the nervous systems so that listening becomes smoother. Even noticing your own breath in this moment may create a gentle sense of alignment. Over-identification is another subtle barrier. When someone shares a story that resembles your own, the mind may merge their experience with your experience. You may begin to project your feelings onto them, assuming similarity where there may be difference. Over-identification blurs boundaries. It prevents accurate empathy. Deep listening recognizes similarity without collapsing distinction. Judgment is also a major barrier. When the mind judges a person's words as wrong, irrational, or exaggerated, the judgment becomes louder than the person. Judgment narrows perception. It closes the heart. It prevents the mind from seeing nuance. Listening requires suspension of judgment, not indefinitely, but long enough to truly understand. Understanding does not require agreement. It requires openness. Another barrier is conversational dominance. Some people speak more than they listen because speaking feels safer. Speaking gives control. Listening requires vulnerability. In relationships, conversational dominance creates imbalance. One person becomes the broadcaster, the other becomes the audience. Connection weakens. But when both people listen deeply, conversation becomes a shared space rather than a performance. One of the most overlooked barriers is lack of self-listening. When a person does not listen to their own feelings, needs, or boundaries, they become overwhelmed easily. Their emotional capacity decreases. Listening to others becomes harder. When inner listening strengthens, outer listening becomes more grounded. Emotional resilience supports presence. Despite these barriers, the capacity for deep listening remains intact in every human being. It is not something you must acquire. It is something you uncover by removing what stands in the way. Awareness is the key. When you become aware of distraction, assumption, impatience, ego, or fear, the barrier weakens. Presence returns. Listening deepens. You may notice certain barriers within yourself even now, perhaps moments when the mind drifted or thoughts pulled attention elsewhere. This noticing is not a problem. It is the beginning of clarity. Awareness creates space, and in space, listening becomes possible again. Understanding these barriers is not about self-criticism. It is about compassion. It is about recognizing that listening is challenging because the human mind is complex and emotional. With awareness, patience, and gentleness, the mind can learn to listen deeply despite its distractions. In the next chapter, we explore how listening becomes a force for healing, how being heard soothes the nervous system, restores emotional balance, and transforms relationships from the inside out. Healing through being heard. To be heard is one of the most fundamental of human needs. It is woven into our biology, our psychology, and our emotional development. When a person feels truly listened to, something shifts deep inside the nervous system. Breath softens, muscles loosen, the heart rate slows, the mind becomes clearer. A sense of safety, longed for and often elusive, emerges quietly. It feels like being met. It feels like being acknowledged. It feels like being human. Now, healing occurs not only through insight or advice, but through presence, through the simple act of one person genuinely receiving the experience of another. Long before therapists existed, long before scientific terms like emotional regulation or co-regulation were coined, people healed through connection, through being witnessed, through being heard. When someone listens deeply, the listener's nervous system communicates safety to the speaker. This happens beneath the level of words. It happens in the pace of breath, the softness of gaze, the steadiness of attention, the quiet acceptance conveyed through silence. The speaker's body senses this. The brain interprets it as permission to relax, to open, to reveal what has long been held tightly. Modern neuroscience offers a clear explanation. Humans regulate one another. The vagus nerve, a key pathway in the parasympathetic nervous system, responds to social cues of safety, gentle tone, patient silence, warm presence. When someone listens without judgment, the speaker's vagus nerve begins to calm the body. Heart rate variability increases. Cortisol drops. The mind shifts from defensive vigilance into reflective awareness. In this state, healing becomes possible. What often feels like healing is not the solution offered, but the presence provided. This is why people sometimes feel lighter after speaking to someone who simply listens. They have been given space to unfold, to understand themselves, to breathe more fully. Healing happens in the space between words, in the silence that holds emotion without rushing it away. When someone experiences deep listening, several layers of healing occur simultaneously. The first layer is emotional validation. Validation does not mean agreement. It means acknowledging that the person's feelings are real, understandable, and meaningful. Even subtle validation, soft tone, steady presence, gentle nods, communicates your experience matters. This alone reduces emotional intensity. Emotions soften when they are acknowledged. They intensify when they are ignored. The second layer of healing is emotional organization. When someone speaks freely and the listener remains present, the speaker's thoughts begin to sort themselves. The mind moves from chaos to clarity. Experiences that were jumbled become coherent. Emotions that were tangled become distinguishable. This process is not intellectual, it is emotional. The presence of a listener gives the speaker's mind a safe space to reorganize itself. The third layer of healing is self-understanding. Through speaking in the presence of a calm listener, people often hear themselves more clearly. They discover truths they did not know they carried. They articulate feelings they had not recognized. The listener becomes a mirror, not by repeating the speaker's words, but by offering a quiet space where inner truth can emerge. The fourth layer is connection. Humans are social beings. Loneliness is not merely an emotion. It is a physiological stressor. Deep listening dissolves loneliness. It creates connection, even in silence. When a person feels heard, they feel less alone. They feel part of something larger. This sense of connection has measurable effects on the immune system, the brain, and emotional well-being. The fifth layer is transformation. When someone feels consistently heard, their relationship with themselves changes. They become less critical, less reactive, less defensive. They begin to internalize the experience of being listened to. Gradually, they learn to listen to themselves with the same compassion. Inner listening becomes gentler. Self-awareness deepens. Emotional resilience grows. Being heard is not merely comforting, it is transformative. It allows emotional wounds to surface safely. It allows grief to move. It allows fear to soften. It allows shame to loosen its grip. The presence of a compassionate listener can reach places within the psyche that words alone cannot. Many people carry unhealed experiences, not because the experiences themselves were unbearable, but because they went unheard. A child who cried without comfort. A teenager who struggled without support. An adult who held pain quietly because no one had space to receive it. These unspoken experiences can lodge in the body, shaping behavior and emotion for years. Deep listening can release them, not instantly, but gradually, through the gentle restoration of safety. Healing through being heard is not limited to deep conversations. Even everyday listening can heal. When someone listens with presence to a simple story, a daily frustration, or a quiet joy. They communicate care. They strengthen connection. They offer grounding. Small acts of listening accumulate over time, creating a reservoir of emotional safety within relationships. This is why, in healthy relationships, people often say, "I just needed someone to listen." They may not need solutions. They may not need advice. They may not need analysis. They need presence. They need closeness. They need someone to share the emotional weight of the moment. In these moments, listening becomes a form of emotional companionship. There is also healing in listening to oneself, which mirrors the experience of being heard by another. When you sit quietly with your own thoughts, feelings, and sensations, without judgment, without rushing, without dismissal, you become your own compassionate witness. This internal listening activates similar neural pathways of calming and regulation. It allows the inner world to unfold safely. It strengthens the bond between your conscious awareness and your deeper emotional self. The breath plays a gentle role in this process. When you take a slower breath, the body sends a signal of safety to the brain. The mind becomes clearer. Emotion becomes less dominant. Listening, whether to another person or to yourself, becomes easier. Even now, if the breath softens or deepens naturally, that is a reflection of the nervous system settling. Healing also occurs through resonance. When a listener is calm and grounded, their presence can shift the emotional state of the speaker. This is known as co-regulation. It is why infants calm in the arms of a relaxed parent. It is why friends feel comforted when sitting quietly together. It is why people sometimes cry when someone listens to them. They finally feel safe enough to release what has been held in tension. In conversation, resonance happens through tone, pacing, breath, and presence. The listener's calmness invites calmness. Their steadiness invites steadiness. Their openness invites openness. This process is mutual. The listener, in turn, often feels more grounded by offering presence. Listening becomes a shared emotional environment where both people experience connection. In therapeutic settings, being heard is at the root of healing. Techniques and theories matter, but the most powerful ingredient in therapy is presence, an environment where the nervous system feels safe enough to reveal what has been hidden. This principle extends beyond therapy to friendships, partnerships, families, and communities. Wherever presence exists, healing follows. Deep listening transforms relationships because it transforms the emotional climate. When people feel heard, misunderstandings decrease. Defensive reactions soften, communication becomes more honest, compassion increases, trust grows. The relationship becomes a refuge rather than a struggle. Importantly, being heard does not require long conversations. Sometimes it happens in a moment, in the quiet recognition in someone's eyes, in the softness of a tone, in a brief pause that conveys patience, in the simple act of not interrupting. Healing is not always dramatic. Often, it is subtle, gradual, and quiet. Healing through being heard reminds us that humans are not isolated minds. We are interconnected nervous systems. We influence one another through presence, tone, and silence. Listening is the way we enter another person's emotional world gently and respectfully. It is the way we offer comfort without needing to solve anything. You may recall times when someone listened to you deeply. Perhaps you felt understood in a way that words cannot describe. Perhaps you felt safe enough to express something fragile. Perhaps you felt a weight lift. These moments stay with us because they meet a fundamental need, the need to be seen, heard, and accepted. Being heard is healing because it restores humanity. It reminds us that our experiences matter. It reminds us that we are not alone. It reminds us that connection is possible, even in silence. In the next chapter, we turn our attention inward again, not to emotions or thoughts, but to the inner landscape of sound itself. The mind carries its own soundscape, shaping perception, memory, and the quiet narratives that accompany every moment of our lives. The soundscape of the mind. Long after a sound fades from the air, it continues echoing within the mind. We carry an inner world shaped not only by memory and emotion, but by subtle internal sound, thoughts spoken silently, imagined voices, remembered tones, fragments of music, echoes of conversations, and the quiet hum beneath awareness. This internal soundscape influences how we perceive reality, how we understand ourselves, and how we listen to others. To understand deep listening fully, we must understand not only the external world of sound, but the inner acoustics of consciousness. The mind is never truly silent. Even in the quietest environments, thoughts arise in language, rhythm, and tone. These internal sounds are not heard with the ears, yet they shape perception as powerfully as any external sound. When the mind is calm, the internal soundscape feels spacious, gentle, open, like a soft background ambience. When the mind is tense, the internal soundscape becomes dense, rapid thoughts, looping memories, emotional noise. Listening to the external world becomes difficult when the internal world is loud. The soundscape of the mind is influenced by past experiences, voices from childhood, teachers, caregivers, friends. These voices leave impressions. Sometimes they become internal guides. Sometimes they become internal critics. Sometimes they replay without our awareness, shaping emotions and decisions in subtle ways. For example, a person who grew up with harsh criticism may carry an internal voice that judges them quickly. A person raised with warmth may carry an internal voice that comforts them. These internal voices are not literal echoes. They are emotional imprints shaped into inner sound. Understanding the soundscape of the mind begins with noticing how thoughts arise. Some thoughts appear as verbal statements, silent sentences spoken within the mind. Others appear as tonal impressions, feeling like sounds without clear language. Others arise as remembered voices, specific tones associated with specific people. And others appear as abstract rhythms, pulses of mental activity that influence mood without forming words. Each of these forms contributes to the internal soundscape. Inner sound also emerges from memory. Memories are often stored with auditory qualities. A remembered lullaby carries its melody. A remembered argument carries its sharp tone. A remembered moment of comfort carries its softness. When memories replay, they carry the emotional resonance of the original sound. These internal resonances can influence perception in the present moment. A person who has experienced conflict may hear tension even in neutral tones. A person who has experienced safety may hear warmth even in silence. The internal soundscape also reflects belief systems. Beliefs shape the tone of inner dialogue. For example, someone who believes they must always be strong may hear an internal voice that dismisses vulnerability. Someone who believes they are unworthy may hear an internal voice that doubts praise. Someone who believes they are capable may hear an internal voice that encourages persistence. These inner tones influence how we receive external sound. They filter perception. They amplify or soften emotional response. Another component of the inner soundscape is imagination. Humans have a profound ability to simulate sound internally. Music may play in the mind without any external source. Echoes of conversations may replay with clarity. Imagined futures may take shape through inner dialogue. This ability is not a distraction. It is a form of mental rehearsal that helps the brain predict, prepare, and create. Imagination can be a source of comfort or anxiety, depending on the emotional tone of the internal sound. Thoughts also carry rhythm. Some minds think in quick, sharp bursts. Others think in slow, flowing waves. Some minds cycle through repetitive loops. Others move in expansive arcs. This rhythm influences emotional state. A fast internal rhythm can create tension or excitement. A slow rhythm can create calm or heaviness. Rhythm is the heartbeat of the internal soundscape. Even silence within the mind has texture. When inner silence is peaceful, it feels spacious, like an open field or a quiet sky. When inner silence is tense, it feels heavy, like the pause before an unresolved conflict. Inner silence is not absence. It is presence. It reveals the state of the nervous system. It reflects deeper patterns of emotion. The soundscape of the mind also shapes how we listen to others. When the internal world is noisy, it dominates awareness. External sound becomes background. The listener hears but does not receive. Words fade into mental static. Emotional cues become difficult to detect. Attention fragments. This is why quieting the mind, even briefly, makes listening easier. A single, slow breath, a moment of stillness, a softening of the shoulders. These small gestures create space in the internal soundscape. When the inner world is calm, listening becomes vivid, nuance becomes audible, emotional cues become clearer, silence becomes soothing rather than uncomfortable. The external soundscape feels connected to the internal world rather than competing with it. This alignment creates a feeling of coherence, inner and outer sound, moving in harmony. Inner listening involves becoming aware of the soundscape of the mind without becoming entangled in it. Thoughts may arise, but they do not have to dominate. Memories may echo, but they do not have to define the moment. Anxiety may create inner noise, but awareness can soften its impact. Inner listening means observing internal sound with curiosity and compassion. It means recognizing patterns without judging them. This awareness can be developed through simple practices. One practice is noticing the tone of inner dialogue, not the content, but the tone. Is it gentle, harsh, neutral, encouraging, doubting? When the tone becomes harsh, awareness can soften it. A gentle acknowledgement, I hear this tone, and I know it comes from old stress, can shift the soundscape. Another practice is pausing briefly before responding in conversation. This pause allows the inner sound to settle, making space for the other person's voice to be heard clearly. Listening to the inner soundscape also helps differentiate between intuition and fear. Intuition often speaks quietly, with clarity and calm. Fear often speaks loudly, with urgency and pressure. When the internal soundscape becomes familiar, these differences become clearer. You learn to distinguish between the inner voice that guides you and the inner noise that overwhelms you. Creativity also emerges from the internal soundscape. Many creative ideas begin as faint internal sounds, whispers of inspiration, fragments of melody, imagined dialogue. When the mind is quiet enough, these subtle inner sounds become more accessible. Many artists, writers, and musicians describe listening inwardly as part of their creative process. They listen to what is forming beneath awareness and allow it to rise. The internal soundscape also plays a role in emotional healing. Many unprocessed emotions carry internal sound, inner cries, inner protests, inner fears. When these internal voices are not heard, they persist quietly, influencing behavior and well-being. When they are listened to gently, with compassion, they soften, they integrate. Listening to oneself becomes a form of emotional release. Inner listening becomes inner healing. The mind's soundscape also shapes how we experience the world. When the inner world is turbulent, the external world feels overwhelming. When the inner world is calm, the external world feels more manageable. This is why practices that reduce internal noise, reflection, breath awareness, moments of stillness have such transformative effects. They change not only the mind's inner sound, but the way the world is heard. You may notice your own internal soundscape in this moment, the quiet hum of thought, the faint rhythm of breath, the soft quality of awareness. This noticing is itself a form of deep listening. It brings the inner and outer worlds into gentle alignment. It creates a sense of presence. The soundscape of the mind is vast, layered, and endlessly shifting. Learning to listen to it with kindness and curiosity deepens self-understanding. It enriches emotional life. It enhances communication. It supports healing. It shapes perception. When the inner world becomes quiet enough to hear itself, the outer world becomes clearer. Listening expands. Awareness deepens. The boundary between inner and outer sound dissolves into a unified experience of presence. In the next chapter, we explore how listening becomes a form of mindfulness, how awareness, curiosity, and non-judgment transform listening into a contemplative practice that enriches daily life and opens the heart. Listening as mindfulness. Mindfulness is often described as the art of paying attention to the present moment, with openness and without judgment. Deep listening is one of the purest expressions of this art. When you listen mindfully, you are not only hearing sound, you are inhabiting the moment fully. You are experiencing presence as it unfolds, without rushing to interpret, fix, or control it. Listening becomes a contemplative act, a quiet meeting between awareness and reality. Mindful listening begins with the quality of attention. It invites the mind to soften its grip on past and future. It invites awareness to settle into what is here. This breath, this sound, this moment. Many people mistake mindfulness for a technique that must be performed with precision. But mindfulness is not rigid. It is gentle. It is spacious. It arises naturally when the mind lets go of the need to hurry. Listening can become an anchor for mindfulness because sound is always present. Sound occurs in real time. It cannot be rewound or anticipated fully. It pulls awareness into the now. Whether it is the rhythm of breath, the distant hum of the environment, or the voice of another person, sound invites presence. When you listen deeply, you align with this invitation. Mindfulness also transforms listening by reducing reactivity. When someone speaks, the mind often reacts automatically. It categorizes, it judges, it compares, it prepares responses. Mindful listening pauses this automatic process. It creates space between hearing and reacting. In this space, understanding can deepen, emotion can soften, perception becomes clearer. This pause is not something forced. It is a natural byproduct of awareness. When you notice the impulse to interrupt, to judge, or to retreat inward, the noticing itself creates distance. That distance allows choice. You are no longer driven by habit. You become a participant rather than a reactor. The moment becomes more spacious. Mindfulness also enhances emotional sensitivity. When you listen without judgment, you hear tone more fully. You notice subtle shifts in pacing. You sense emotional undertones. You become aware of the speaker's breath, hesitations, and silence. These cues reveal deeper layers of meaning. Listening becomes attunement, an intuitive understanding of emotional truth. Non-judgment is essential to mindful listening. Judgment narrows perception. It closes the heart. It evaluates rather than experiences. Mindful listening invites you to receive sound and emotion without categorizing them as right or wrong, logical or illogical, appropriate or inappropriate. This openness allows deeper truth to emerge, not because you agree with everything you hear, but because you meet it without immediate resistance. Mindfulness also involves curiosity. Curiosity keeps the mind open. It softens assumption. It invites discovery. When you listen with curiosity, you become interested in what is being said and what is not being said. You become attentive to nuance. You ask yourself not, how should I respond? But what is unfolding here? Curiosity transforms listening from a task into a journey. The breath supports mindful listening in profound ways. Breath is the bridge between body and mind. When the breath is slow and steady, awareness stabilizes. The nervous system shifts into calm. Listening becomes easier. When the breath becomes shallow or rapid, tension increases. Presence diminishes. Listening narrows. Simply noticing breath as you listen can anchor awareness. A natural softening of the jaw, a lengthening of the exhale, a gentle release of tension in the shoulders. These small shifts create the internal conditions for deep listening. Mindful listening also involves sensing the whole context of communication. It is not limited to words. It includes body language, emotional energy, silence, and environment. It includes your own internal responses. It becomes a holistic experience of connection. You feel the moment rather than analyze it. This holistic awareness allows you to respond with greater authenticity and compassion. Mindfulness deepens listening by quieting the ego's insistence on being the center. The ego wants control. It wants certainty. It wants to be right. In mindful listening, the ego loosens. You become less concerned with your own narrative and more open to another's reality. This humility creates space for genuine dialogue. It softens conflict. It invites empathy. Mindfulness also helps dissolve the illusion of separateness. When you listen deeply to someone, your attention merges with their voice, their breath, their emotional presence. For a moment, your awareness enters their world. You feel with them rather than merely observing. This shared presence is a profound form of connection. It blurs the boundary between self and other without erasing individuality. It opens the heart. Listening mindfully to others grows naturally from listening mindfully to yourself. When you practice inner stillness, pausing to notice breath, sensation, emotion, you cultivate the capacity to sit with experience without judgment. This inner practice reflects outward. You become more patient with others, more attuned, more compassionate. Your listening becomes grounded in the ability to be present with your own inner world. Mindful listening also transforms how we experience silence. Silence becomes a friend rather than a gap. It becomes a space for reflection rather than discomfort. When silence is allowed, conversations deepen. Moments of insight arise. Emotion has room to breathe. Silence becomes part of the dialogue, an element of communication as vital as speech. When mindfulness is rooted in listening, everyday life becomes more vivid. You begin to notice the sound of footsteps, the texture of a breeze, the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Small sounds that once faded into the background become part of a richer sensory tapestry. This heightened awareness brings calm, clarity, and a sense of being fully alive. Mindful listening also serves as protection from emotional overwhelm. When you listen mindfully, you remain aware of your own boundaries. You sense when you need space. You notice when your energy shifts. You remain connected to yourself, even as you connect with others. This balance allows empathy without emotional exhaustion. It allows compassion without self-sacrifice. It is a form of emotional intelligence that grows naturally from presence. In difficult conversations, mindful listening is especially transformative. It allows you to stay grounded even when emotions rise. It allows you to hear beneath the surface, beneath anger, fear, frustration. It allows you to respond with clarity rather than defensiveness. It invites humility, patience, and understanding. Difficult conversations become opportunities for deeper connection rather than conflict. Mindfulness also helps dissolve the tendency to personalize. When someone speaks with intensity, the mind may interpret it as a personal attack or responsibility. Mindful listening recognizes that emotions often reflect inner struggles, not the listener's worth. This recognition softens defensiveness. It opens the door to compassion. Listening as mindfulness is not a technique. It is a way of being. It arises naturally when awareness deepens, when the mind becomes spacious, when the heart becomes open. It is not limited to quiet environments or formal practices. It can occur in ordinary moments, in the midst of conversation, in a brief pause, in the steady rhythm of daily life. You may notice, as you listen now, the quiet quality of your own awareness, the gentle rhythm of breath, the subtle sound of the environment, the stillness between these words. This noticing is mindfulness. It is presence. It is the foundation of deep listening. Listening as mindfulness transforms communication into presence. It transforms presence into understanding, and it transforms understanding into connection, a connection that is tender, grounded, and deeply human. In the next chapter, we shift our gaze outward once more, exploring how listening shapes the future of human connection in a world of rapid technology, changing communication patterns, and evolving forms of attention. The future of human connection. Human connection is evolving. The world is changing rapidly, technologically, socially, psychologically. And with this change comes a profound shift in how people listen, how they relate, and how they understand one another. As communication accelerates, attention fragments and digital environments reshape daily life. Deep listening becomes both more challenging and more essential than ever. The future of connection depends on whether we can rediscover, protect, and nurture the art of listening in a world that pulls us constantly away from presence. Technology has transformed communication in remarkable ways. It has made connection instant, global, and continuous. People can speak across continents, share thoughts in real time, and maintain relationships that would have been impossible in earlier eras. But this abundance of communication does not guarantee depth. In fact, the sheer volume of digital interaction can dilute the quality of attention. When messages arrive constantly, when screens flicker with notifications, when conversations overlap without pause, the nervous system becomes overstimulated. Attention becomes scattered. Listening becomes shallow. The digital world rewards speed more than depth. Social media encourages rapid responses, quick judgments, and brief exchanges. The algorithms amplify emotional intensity, pushing extreme content to capture attention. In this environment, listening becomes reactive. People respond before they reflect. They interpret through the lens of assumption rather than presence. They consume communication the way they consume information, quickly, continuously, and often without deeper engagement. Yet, beneath the noise, the human need for deep connection remains unchanged. People still long to be understood, seen, and heard. They long for conversations that linger rather than scroll. They long for presence rather than performance. The future of human connection will be shaped by how society balances digital efficiency with emotional depth. One challenge is that digital communication removes many of the cues that support deep listening: tone, breath, posture, micro-expressions, and the subtle energy of presence. Without these cues, misunderstandings increase. A short message can be interpreted as anger. A delayed reply can feel like rejection. A neutral tone can feel cold. This creates emotional tension and makes listening through screens more complicated. To navigate this, people must become more intentional in how they communicate. They must cultivate clarity, patience, and empathy, even when cues are limited. At the same time, digital communication offers new forms of listening. People share their thoughts through long messages, voice notes, journals, and reflective posts. They open parts of themselves they might hesitate to reveal face-to-face. For some, digital space provides a sense of safety. It allows them to express feelings with deliberation, without the pressure of immediate response. This too can be a form of deep listening, listening through text, through silence between messages, through the emotional undertones of written words. In the future, listening will require new skills, not only the ancient abilities of presence and empathy, but also digital discernment. People will need to learn when to engage and when to pause, when to step away from the endless stream of information, when to seek stillness to reset attention. Without these skills, the mind becomes saturated, listening becomes fragmented. Artificial intelligence will also shape the future of listening. Machines can generate speech, interpret emotion, and hold conversations. Some AI systems are being designed to listen to users for therapeutic or emotional support. These technologies may offer comfort, insight, or companionship in moments of isolation, but they also raise questions. What does it mean to be listened to by something that does not have a nervous system, a history, or a soul? Can a machine truly understand emotion? Can it offer presence, or only the simulation of presence? AI cannot replace the depth of human attunement, but it may assist it. It may help people reflect on their emotions, organize their thoughts, or practice communication skills. The future will involve learning how to integrate technology into emotional life without allowing it to replace the human capacity for empathy and connection. The danger lies not in technology itself, but in forgetting how to listen to one another deeply. Attention will become one of the most valuable resources of the future. As information multiplies, attention will become the defining currency of meaningful connection. Those who can offer presence, who can listen without distraction, who can hold space for others, who can remain grounded in a fast-moving world, will create relationships that are rare and powerful. Presence will become an act of generosity. Cultural shifts may also bring new forms of listening. As societies become more diverse, the ability to listen across differences, cultural, generational, ideological, will become essential. Deep listening will involve not only hearing what is familiar, but opening to what is unfamiliar. It will require humility, curiosity, and the willingness to consider perspectives that challenge one's own. This is not easy. The human mind prefers comfort and confirmation. But the future of connection depends on the willingness to listen beyond what feels safe. Mental health will also shape the future of listening. Rising levels of anxiety, stress, and isolation create greater need for supportive, understanding presence. People will increasingly seek relationships where they feel emotionally held. Listening will become a central form of care, not only in therapy, but in friendships, families, and communities. Those who listen deeply will become anchors for others. They will offer steadiness in a world that feels increasingly fast and uncertain. Deep listening will also play a role in addressing global challenges. Whether discussing climate change, social issues, or technological ethics, the ability to listen across perspectives will determine whether solutions emerge. Conflict often intensifies when listening breaks down. Dialogue deepens when listening is restored. The future will require conversations that are not about winning, but about understanding. As technology accelerates, mindfulness will become not a luxury, but a necessity. The ability to pause, breathe, and return to presence will protect the nervous system from overwhelm. It will preserve the capacity for empathy. It will keep communication grounded in humanity. The future of connection will belong to those who remain capable of stillness in a noisy world. Listening also has the potential to evolve through new cultural practices. Some communities are already creating spaces for intentional listening, circles where people speak without interruption, gatherings where silence is honored, environments where attention is shared rather than scattered. These practices may become more widespread as people recognize that the solution to digital overload is not more technology, but deeper presence. The future may also bring new scientific insights into listening. Neuroscience continues to reveal how attention, emotion, and connection shape the brain. As this knowledge expands, people may learn to cultivate listening through practical methods that strengthen neural circuits associated with empathy, regulation, and attunement. Listening may become a taught skill, just as meditation and mindfulness have become accessible through scientific understanding. At its core, the future of human connection depends on remembering something ancient. Presence is irreplaceable. The human nervous system responds not to speed, not to efficiency, not to acceleration, but to presence. A moment of genuine listening can heal what hours of distraction cannot. A single conversation held with openness can shift the course of a relationship. A shared silence can restore trust. Technology cannot replicate this. Algorithms cannot produce presence. The future will test whether humanity can carry this depth forward into a world of endless noise. You may feel even now the quiet contrast between the pace of the world and the pace of listening. Listening draws you inward towards stillness. It softens the edges of thought. It invites you into connection. This contrast will grow more important as the world moves faster. Listening will become a refuge. The future of human connection is not predetermined. It will be shaped by the choices people make each day. To pause rather than react. To listen rather than assume. To be present rather than distracted. to open rather than close. These small acts of listening will shape the emotional landscape of relationships, communities, and societies. And beneath all of this lies a timeless truth. Listening is how humans understand one another. It is how they create meaning. It is how they experience love. In the final chapter, we return to the heart of this journey, a closing reflection that brings together presence, compassion, and the deep truth that listening is not only about sound, but about being fully alive in the moment. Closing reflection. Listening is one of the quietest acts a human being can perform, yet it carries extraordinary power. It shapes relationships, deepens understanding, and opens the heart to truths that cannot be found through thought alone. As we reach the end of this journey, the essence of deep listening reveals itself not as a technique, but as a way of being, a presence that honors the world, others, and oneself. Throughout this exploration, a pattern has emerged. Listening begins externally, with sound entering the ear. It moves inward, shaping thought and emotion. It expands outward again, shaping relationships, culture, and the future of human connection. Listening is circular. It moves through the mind, the body, and the world like a quiet current. Every part of life participates in it. Every moment offers an invitation. Deep listening is the act of meeting the world without resistance. It is the choice to be fully present with what is happening now. This breath, this voice, this silence. It is not always easy. The mind is restless. The world is noisy. Emotions rise and fall. Distractions pull attention in every direction. But presence is always available. Even now, a small shift in awareness, a softening of the shoulders, a slower breath, a moment of quiet, can bring you back into alignment with the moment. Listening is also an act of compassion. When you listen deeply to another person, you communicate that their inner world matters. You create a space where they can unfold without fear. You allow them to feel seen. This is not merely emotional kindness. It is a form of healing. It helps regulate the nervous system, release tension, and restore balance. Listening is how connection grows. Listening inward is equally important. The inner world carries its own truths, soft signals from the body, quiet intuitions, tender emotions, and the subtle tone of inner dialogue. When you listen inward without judgment, you strengthen the relationship with yourself. You become more grounded, more aware, more attuned. Inner listening helps you navigate outer life with clarity. The world around you also speaks. Nature offers its own rhythms: wind, water, birdsong, the quiet before dawn, the stillness after sunset. These sounds restore the mind. They reconnect you to something larger. Listening to the world invites awe, patience, and humility. In a world that moves quickly, listening slows time. It brings you back into the present, where life is actually lived. It reminds you that presence is the foundation of meaning. When you listen deeply, you enter a state of awareness where thought becomes clearer, emotion becomes softer, and the moment becomes more vivid. Listening reveals life's subtle beauty. It is easy to underestimate the impact of deep listening. One moment of presence can change the emotional climate of a conversation. One silent pause can soften conflict. One breath can reset the nervous system. One act of genuine listening can make another person feel valued in a way they will remember for years. Deep listening is also transformative at a societal level. Understanding grows when people listen across differences. Compassion grows when people listen without defensiveness. Peace grows when people listen with humility. The future will depend on whether people choose to listen, not only to those who are similar, but to those who challenge, surprise, or oppose them. In the quiet moments of life, when everything else falls away, listening reveals something fundamental about being human. Beneath the noise of thought, beneath the rhythm of breath, beneath the soundscape of the world, there is a stillness, a presence, a sense of being that is always here. When you listen deeply enough, you begin to hear this presence, not as a sound, but as an awareness. It is the quiet core of consciousness. It is the place where listening and being become one. This stillness is not separate from life. It moves through every interaction, every conversation, every silence. It is the background that makes listening possible. It is the space in which connection grows. When you rest in this stillness, even for a moment, the world becomes clearer. Relationships become more meaningful. Life becomes more gentle. Deep listening does not end with this reflection. It continues in the moment you return to your life, in the conversations you have, the pauses you allow, the breath you take before responding, the stillness you offer to yourself and others. Every moment offers an opportunity to listen more deeply, to sound, to silence, to emotion, to truth. As this journey comes to a close, the essence of deep listening remains simple. Listen with presence. Listen with curiosity. Listen with compassion. Listen to the world. Listen to others. Listen to yourself. And listen to the quiet moments in between, for they often carry the deepest wisdom. In the end, listening is not only about hearing. It is about being awake to life. It is about returning again and again to the present moment, with openness, with awareness, and with the quiet recognition that connection begins with listening.